Welcome to this week's episode of the Leadership Lane podcast, and I'm really lucky this week to be joined by entrepreneur and leader Bill Nikolouzakis. Bill, welcome to the Leadership Lane podcast.
Thanks for having me, and great work on the surname. It's a win. It's a tough one to pronounce.
Well, full disclosure, I did practice it beforehand and got the information because I know what it's like for people to kind of get your surname wrong. So yeah, welcome. It's really great to have you chatting with us today.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's great to be on and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. Well, Leadership Lane podcast listeners wanted to bring Bill on today because he's got a really interesting story, and particularly a interesting leadership story, which spans, obviously a number of years, and you've done some interesting things. So by way of introduction, Bill is absolutely an entrepreneur at heart and has been from the very beginning of his career, founding your first company at the ripe old age of 21. Bill. So that's an achievement that not too many will have achieved, which is fantastic. I'd love to hear more about that. By the age of 26, you'd gone on to establish a further 3 companies. And even these days now, you are the managing director at Levels Growth Consultants, which provides consulting services focused on helping SMBs execute sustainable growth and leadership coaching services. And you're also the co-founder of the digital law firm Bond Conveyancing and a non-executive director at Urban Seed Project. And I'm sure that in between all of those wonderful accolades and roles, there's a really fantastic leadership story that's woven through all that. So we'll pop all of the links into the show notes around the organisations that Bill's a part of. But again, I just want to extend a warm welcome and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's really great, and I love telling the entrepreneurial story because it's often one that's super choppy. It's much harder than you ever expect, but also much more rewarding than you'll ever expect as well. So good on the upside and can be pretty bad on the downside. But for us that do it every day, we wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point, Bill. And we might start off there around kind of that entrepreneurial bent, because a lot of us, even in leadership, I love as much as I love the term entrepreneur, I really love the term intrapreneur too. So those that kind of venture out and try and create new ideas and bring creativity and innovation to workplaces and organizations that they may work in. In your mind, and I mean, given that you've led organizations since you were 21, at the ripe old age of 21, but in your mind, what are the fundamental capabilities that make a really good entrepreneur?
Yeah, and when I talk about entrepreneurs, I use that word not just in being a business owner, but some of the best sort of C-level executives I've ever met have a really strong entrepreneurial spirit, and they work as if it's their business. So it doesn't mean you have to own a business to really have that spirit. And I think what makes the most important trait to be a successful entrepreneur is resilience, the ability to bounce back. And to push on when other people stop, that saying, it's always darkest before the dawn. I've got numerous occasions in my career where it all looked like it was going to be the worst thing, that's potentially bankruptcy in a lot of situations, and it ended up being the other side of that being a massive success. Because it forces you to look inward and to reestablish maybe a business that wasn't doing well. So I think that resilience is a really key factor, and the ability to lead. And leadership, I think, in this day and age is not just about strategy and execution, which are of course extremely important, but it's being able to develop a story and sell the dream not only to your clients but to your staff members as well. And I think with Gen Ys being the major employment group now out there, they're the way you need to manage Gen Ys and the millennials and so forth, and Gen Zs is very, very different to how we used to manage previous generations. So, and being able to really sell them on the story and the dream is an integral part of being a good leader these days.
Yeah, and that I know that storytelling, so it comes up a lot as a core capability of leadership, and I know even if I'm presenting or a presentation that I really get engrossed in, it's usually got a fantastic story that I can connect with. What works for you, like in coming up and sharing those stories and sharing those, whether it's an intact team, a bunch of investors, clients, whoever it might be that you're working with, what do you bring in around, storytelling to really
Yeah.
connect a message to them?
It's funny because when I talk about storytelling, I hope people don't conflate that with making up a story, right? It's about, I think, being a good storyteller. There's probably a few things, but the main thing is that you have to really believe in what you're doing. You have to truly, deep inside you, have a strong belief that what you're doing is going to work. And I always say to people, when you're developing a new business line or a new business or whatever it is, you don't have to have the best product to really believe in it. Maybe it's the best at a certain niche group of clients that fit within that product, or maybe it's the best at a certain part of that process. And it's really what you have to believe in, that you are the best at something in your product. If you don't think that you have the best product or service in one way or another, then I challenge why you should be doing it in the first place. Really, you have to believe that you're doing something better than what's out there at the moment. And like I said, it doesn't have to be the overall best product, but you have to be doing something better that's out there at the moment. You have to strongly believe in that. And you have to be able to then convince other people that is the best way to do it too. And that's what I say to all business owners, whether you're a tech guy or a financial advisor or all these people that don't ever want to be called a salesperson. I always say that you are a salesperson, because maybe you're not talking to clients, but you need to sell the concept and the dream to your team.
Yeah, that's I would use the word conviction with what you're associating there, because it's absolutely that strong belief. And if you're not believing, and if it's not genuinely and authentically coming from a place of truth for you, it's almost impossible, I think, to get others to connect in with that.
Yeah, and I got a quick story that explains sort of what I mean by being able to sell this dream. And we're at PropTech Group. We had a couple of some amazing products that were the best in the industry, and we had some other products that probably weren't the best in and of their own. A standalone product weren't the best product in the industry. But because of the way that we integrated them into our core products and we made them really easy to use, they ended up being more useful to the real estate agents who bought that software product, because they didn't use all the bells and whistles on the other products anyway. That is one of the core capabilities of that product. And because we integrated it with our other system and they could use everything out of one login and one screen, it became a much better product for them, although maybe not a better product at all. So, being able to deliver that message to our sales team, our marketing team, the subsidiary businesses who probably didn't love hearing that kind of messaging, it was really important part of that process. And the way we did it is, instead of going in and saying, hey, we've got this whiz-bang new product, we went back to all our agents and we changed our concept from being a salesperson to being their technology partner. So we said, hey, we've got this suite of products that all work together, but each and of their own may not have been the best product in the market. Some of them were, but may not have been the best. So being able to have, again, that conviction, the word that you use to be able to deliver that message, and this stakeholder engagement piece as you get into bigger businesses is so important, because you're constantly convincing people of things. And if you don't, like I said, if you don't believe in it, wholeheartedly, you can't. Maybe you can fake it to some degree. Some people are good at that, but not over the long term. You have to really believe.
Yeah, I agree. So stakeholder engagement is once we reach those more senior levels of leadership, we're constantly, and sometimes it can feel like that's all you're doing, managing different people's interests and their different perspectives on whatever it is that you're working with them on. Over the years, in terms of the capabilities that have stood you in good ground for stakeholder engagement, what have you found them to be?
Understanding who your stakeholders are, a deep understanding. I always say, obviously clients are stakeholders, but then depending on the size of your business, there might be your referral partners. Maybe you get your clients from somewhere, you've got a reseller or a supplier. Really understanding who all your stakeholders are, and then what do they want? What do they want out of the relationship? And having a deep understanding of that. And, I go a little bit deeper than that. And I think really not only what they want from a professional perspective, but you should really, at that point, if they're stakeholders, you should have a personal relationship and an understanding of personally what they want out of it as well. And then, really tailoring what you're doing to every single person. And, I talk about this as if I'm perfect at it, but I'm certainly not. I think if anyone's watching this that I've managed up to, sometimes I'm not great at that. Stakeholder engagement, up, down, all my teams always got along with really well, had a really strong trust with them, strong accountability, but also strong support. And that's how you build really good relationships with sort of people that report to you. But I've always had a little bit of difficulty reporting up. And that's something I'm still working on to this day.
Yeah, I reckon, Bill, it's such a good point. Whenever I run a leadership development program with a group, at some point or another, I'll ask the group individually just to note down what their leadership opportunities and challenges are. And particularly on the challenges, without fail, 50% of those post-it notes that they pop up on the board will say managing up.
Yeah.
And I reckon it's a really common one that comes. I think as we become more senior in leadership roles and as we develop our leadership capability, we get really good at knowing our team. And you said, like, developing that deep understanding of the team, understanding what they want, understanding what drives them. But I reckon stakeholders that sit above us and around us, from board level and through to executive colleagues that you might have and other senior leaders, I reckon you're constantly kind of playing this game of trying to match needs to, like, you've both got something that you want to achieve, and maybe there are multiple parties with multiple things that need to be achieved. And I think it's a constant game of trying to fit or create like a Tetris puzzle, or a jigsaw puzzle rather, with things that create, but they don't always create. So I think and I'm glad you called it out, because I think it's something that a lot of people run into issues with. What have you found has worked for you in the past with managing up?
I'm still working at it, to be completely honest. But I think really, again, just trying to understand from their viewpoint, because managing up changes too, right? If you're an entry level role, managing up is different to when you're the C-level executive or even a CEO to a board, right? Very, very different process. And that I find that extremely difficult. Like, I find that because they're not in the business full time. Typically, you're meeting with them maybe once a month or once a quarter. Maybe they're not across all the intricacies, and they've also had probably a lot of success, most of them, so they've got strong opinions. And being able to manage that is really difficult. But again, I think you have to, it's this art of persuasion, right? And again, like, I don't care if you're a salesperson or a tech guy, when you get into those senior roles, you have to be able to persuade people that your idea is the right idea to move forward. And I always say hierarchy, when it comes to ideas, hierarchy is not important, right? The best idea wins. And I try to, I guess, live that going, with my team coming up to me, but then also the other way around. And maybe one of the things that I'll work on in the future is maybe setting expectations better, because I think maybe when you're managing up, they set expectations to you, but maybe there's got to be, respectfully, some expectations set the other way as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like, this common ground is kind of the theme that's coming into my mind as you say that. So, like, establishing alignment across different needs, so rather than them being almost competing priorities, it's like kind of going in with, I've got a couple of ingredients, I know what I want to cook, but then I might bring another person in and they might give me a totally different idea, which gives me a different dish. It's a better dish overall because I've had that input from the other person. And I think that point on expectations, it's also managing our own around, it might look different by the time I get through this conversation, but that's actually going to be the best outcome.
Yeah, and I think that emotional intelligence piece and having that understanding of yourself and where you might fall short in certain things, and how you react to different things emotionally, all that's really important managing up. And being self-aware, because you're not always right, and if you're managing up, the person you're managing up to probably has seen some things that you haven't seen. So maybe sometimes it's not about sure, you should go into every negotiation or every time you're managing up about something with the desire to get your way because you believe that's the right way, but you should be open to the discussion. And if somebody shows you a viewpoint that's different, again, just being self-aware enough to say, hey, that actually, that sounds right, and changing your viewpoint. I think that's really important in business overall when you're dealing with anything, just being open to that fact that you probably sometimes will be wrong, more often, a lot of times will be wrong, or could be more right, if that makes sense. So to being open to those discussions, I think that's another thing maybe that I've had to work on over the years managing up, because you're so passionate and you've had success and you really doing certain things, and maybe you don't give the other opinions as much credence as yours.
Yeah, I think if we get too position based or fixed on our position, and then we end up developing a reputation for that, it means that we're hard to do business with, or we're hard as leaders. And I think then it's a dangerous position to find yourself in if you're a leader and people know that you're difficult to work with. So I think people respect a challenging conversation and one that is designed to bring about a better outcome. But I think it's quite tough for people to work where they know that they're just going to come up with kind of a stubbornness and a very fixed mindset around how things should be done.
Yeah, I've got to say that the biggest challenges I have from a stakeholder personality standpoint are, managing down. I've got, we can talk about this later, but I've got a certain way that I onboard people, and that gives me license to have tough conversations and gives them license to and so forth. But, when you're managing up, the biggest challenge I have is with the more stubborn personalities that don't, if you have a strong conversation with them, take it as disrespectful, even though, I'm really confident that I do my best to not be confrontational, but, to push that, my viewpoint forward. And like I said, working down, because I've set the expectations, done the onboarding process. We talk about this radical honesty policy and things that we go through, and we'll talk about that later. But you don't do that going up, right? Because they're dictating the terms. So sometimes that can be friction points. And stakeholder engagement goes both ways. They need to have some kind of stakeholder engagement with you, right? So sometimes you just deal with people that are not open to that kind of thing. So you've got to acknowledge that and just do your best to get the best outcomes that you can with those people.
Yeah, that's great. And I do want to I'm fascinated by this radical honesty, and I want to come back to that. Yeah. In terms of, I'll ask you, because I mentioned it before around leadership opportunities, leadership challenges. I'll frame it in a slightly different way. But through the course of your career, given that you've led businesses for such a significant time of your life, what has been the most significant leadership challenge that you've ever faced? Like, what's really been a setback that's taking your breath away? And how did you overcome it? You spoke about resilience before. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this fits in leadership challenge, but the toughest period I've been through in business, and it was a leadership challenge, was when I got appointed CEO of a publicly listed company. I sold my business to them a year and a half earlier. Didn't do the DD I should have done, and they were rapidly going into receivership. It was a really bad position. I could see the writing on the wall. I resigned. The board asked me to stay and try and help save the business. And how I did that, there was a lot of wins that happened a lot of way, but we had to let go of a massive proportion of the workforce, 90-something% of the workforce, right, to make it work. And that was the biggest personal challenge I've had in my life. Just being, and I probably did that in a way that it could have been done a lot better. I was still pretty young, I was in my early 30s. Had never been through that before. Everything that I'd done, more or less, for the last 10 years before that had done okay. And I'd never had to let go of a lot of people unless they weren't performing. These people wasn't really because they weren't performing, some of them. And you had to let people go. And, the nature of it is had to be done quickly. And I probably could have done it better. Maybe, some being a bit more, personal about it. It's the nature of it is you're so worried about getting sued and stuff that you do everything by the book, but probably to the detriment of the person that you're dealing with, because you can't emote or anything with them. So that was a really tough period. I think it was 40 something people we had to do over 2 stages. The most horrible thing I've ever been through. And like I said, if I had to do that again, I hope I never have to, I would do it really differently.
Yeah. What were your learnings? I mean, again, we're touching wood that you don't have, find yourself in a situation, but I know a lot of leaders do. And I know that a lot of the, whether you believe the media or not at the moment, there's certainly a lot out there around economic downturn and tougher times ahead. So what would you do differently if you were in that situation again? What were your learnings?
Yeah. So first of all, as horrible as it sounds, it was the absolute right decision. Because we were 3 months away from going bankrupt, literally, seeing the receivers every week, and we saved that business, and then the share price increased by 500%. So, it was the right decision in a really difficult circumstance, but it was the right decision. What would I do differently? I think I would worry a little bit less, and this might sound counterintuitive, but I think I'd worry a little bit less about the legal side of it and take a more personal approach.
Yeah.
We had lawyers in the meetings. We had, they wanted to do most of the talking. These are people that I've known, especially with the business that I sold into that I'd known for 10 years, some of them 8 years, and I think taking control of the situation more myself rather than letting other people control that situation is probably the biggest learning that I had. You have to take responsibility for these things, even though it wasn't, I wasn't running that business. I wasn't really part of the issues. I've taken on that role. I should have taken responsibility for it. And I think I probably handled responsibility a bit too much in that process. That's probably what I'd do differently.
Yeah. So I'm hearing there almost like connecting in and letting your gut instinct lead more is what I like. Did that come into play for you? That's what kind of came across, but was that a real thing for you?
Yeah, look, at the time I didn't trust my instincts at all, because it was such a stressful period. And you got a bunch of lawyers telling you, and we had to go through Fair Work, even though it was ridiculously, it was sure we had to do these things, otherwise we would have got broke. But we still do have to go to Fair Work with one person, especially. So some people just have bad intentions. The employees knew that we had it was the wrong thing. We had to do what we had to do, but some people just have bad intentions. But yeah, I think going with your gut is so big in business, and you have to trust your intuition. And in this instance, certainly I didn't.
It can be really hard. Like I find talking to leaders, that gut instinct and intuition, often it becomes clouded with everything that's going on up here in our heads. So it's almost like what's going on in our heads, the thinking piece tends to overtake the gut instinct, and the use of that sixth sense almost becomes something that we put to the side. What helps you connect in with your intuition and also like kind of allow yourself to lead through this gut instinct? What do you find helps?
Yeah. So I think intuition is really important to me, but I think when I let my intuition sort of lead me a little bit is after I've done the data, right? So I'm led by the data. So then I'll first I try not to make any decisions or let myself think of the way I'm going to go with something until I've looked at the data, whatever data there is, or if it might not be empirical data, it might be discussions that you have with different people about something. I try and do all that first, and then sit down and say, okay, well, what do I want to do? Where do I feel like we need to move? But it's only after I've seen, taken all the evidence in. I think that's the best way I've learned over the years to use intuition, because I think if you just went off the bat intuition, it's not going to be strong. I think your success rate's going to be much lower. I think you're going to be led by evidence first, whether that's data or speaking to other professionals or whatever it is, and then let your intuition, lead you from there.
Yeah, I really like, so it's a common thinking preference, if you like, and any work that I do with diagnostics and particularly personality profiling, we usually will look at that in terms of decision making and where do you start first? Is it head or heart, or is it heart then head? But it is a very, very common approach around looking at what you're almost sense making. You're calibrating everything that you've got from what I'm hearing you say, and then you're going, all right, well, I've got all these data points now. I'm in a position where I can actually connect in with what feels right, as opposed to going kind of off, literally not much other than a thought.
Yeah, and as you get into more senior roles, but even in entrepreneurship, we talked about before, what are some of the things that make a good entrepreneur? I didn't talk about this one, but it's a massive one, is decision making, right? Because really, as a leader, when you get to a certain level, that's pretty much all you're doing, is you're making decisions, right? You've got people doing the strategy, you got people doing most of the other things, and you're making decisions, and that's where people earn their salt. And you think about some of the best leaders of our generation, the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos of the world, love them or hate them personally, their decision making in light of of all the difficulties they must have had. Think about Jeff Bezos, how much pressure he must have had from his board when they were losing hundreds of millions of dollars year on year, and everyone thought it was this horrible business that was never going to be profitable. And then look at it now, right? He had his decision making was just so spot on throughout that, and under immense I could only imagine the pressure. I've read his book as well, and I can only imagine the pressure he must have been on to make different decisions, but he made the right ones, and that's what made a a company that could have gone broke into, one of the biggest, most successful companies in the world.
Yeah, it's a really good example of like that data over the course of those years, the data would have been telling them to run the other way, right? But there must have been something in there that he thought, well, just stay with us because we've got a vision here around what we want to do. And I imagine it also would have been, I haven't read his book yet, but that adaptation and constantly adapting the vision and really flexing it, so it's fit for purpose, but it's also fitting the market need. There would have been, I imagine, a huge level of trust, but also that intuition around stick with me, like this is going to work.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was data as well.
Yeah.
I'm sure he would have looked at the size of the markets that he was approaching, and getting a certain percentage of those. And I mean, there must have been data that was leading him that way too. But certainly, especially in the public markets, where I've been a CEO of a listed company, it's quarterly scorecards. The long term. Everyone talks about the long term, but really, nobody cares. It's really quarterly scorecards that actually move the share price. So he had a long-term approach in a short-term world, and that's what makes the great leaders, the people that can move away from that short-termism, and have that. Sure, you have to make the short-term work too. You can't just, it's very seldom you could do what Jeff Bezos did, and have someone back you that much to give you literally hundreds of millions of dollars to burn more, maybe more, before you reach profitability. But you got to have strength in your convictions, and if that it's the right approach, then you have to back yourself. And we saw what happened to Steve Jobs when he backed himself, got booted, but then he came back and changed himself, and then turned Apple into is one of the biggest companies in the world now, I think.
Yeah, by far. And I love what you said there about that long-term approach in a short-term world. I think that's fantastic, because it is that long-term approach can be difficult to sustain, but as long as you're able to demonstrate the proof of what's being achieved in that time, you're giving those stakeholders, whether it is your board or investors or your team even, you're kind of saying, well, stick with me because we do have this long-term vision, but we've got to be able to measure it and show that progress as we go.
Yeah, and I remember at PropTech Group, we did a roadshow. And you think about the day before the roadshow and the day after the roadshow, nothing changed in our business. The business was exactly the same. Our share price went up 3 times almost after the roadshow, because nobody just knew our vision and what we were trying to achieve. And after we went and told people, they all started buying our stock, right? So that tells you about that short-term world. Really nothing changed in that business overnight. Really, it's really just about people understood what we were trying to achieve better.
It fits into the storytelling that you talked about before. Like it's you being able to convey to people what your intention is and how you're going to do it.
Yeah, and then when you do these roadshows, then you've got to post everything to the public market. So then the public market saw everything as well, and then it feeds on itself. But certainly you got to have that long-term outlook if you want to have a successful business. In entrepreneur land, especially if you're bootstrapping, you're not got investment funds, you've got to find a way to make it work now, but also make sure you got that eye on that end vision, and keeping that end in mind, I think is so important. And often you don't end up where you think you're going to end up, but you have to still have an end in mind. Otherwise, you've got no direction. I remember when I started the business that I sold to iBuyNew Group, the listed company, in 2008. I started a research company. We were selling research reports. There wasn't enough money in it. And then we started, being the middleman between a developer and the agent and building this digital product around and research. And that business, we built it in a way that was super process driven, because in my mind, I wanted to exit that business so I didn't have to work every day and I could install a manager. That was what I wanted to do. But by building all these really tight processes and systems and building these big relationships, suddenly it became an attractive acquisition target. Because then they're like, actually, there's no key man risk here. He's built the business in a way where we don't need him. So if he leaves one day, we're not going to lose value. So sometimes it's not what you expect, but if you build it the right way with a vision in mind, you might get that outcome, or you might get another good outcome, but it's going to always be better than not having a long-term outlook. Yeah,
I agree. So that vision piece continues to drive you. And I think it's we talked before about being stubborn and rigid, which we were talking about in the context of stakeholder engagement, but I think that also applies around your vision, because if you're very fixed and you only see it as I must achieve this, you're not open potentially to, well, number one, you could be terribly disappointed when that thing doesn't come off, whatever it is. But secondly, you might not, you might be closed to other opportunities that come your way, which still enable you to have that success, but it might just look a little bit different to what you thought.
Yeah, I veer very differently. I you know, I do a lot of executive coaching, but I find that I'm really different to pretty much every other executive coaching. That I hate business plans. I think they're a waste of time. I think you got to do financial modeling, and you got to have maybe a one pager of what you're trying to achieve and how you're going to do it. But you know, in the first couple of years, it is extremely likely it is going to look very different to what you thought it was going to look like. You know, maybe even a totally different way of generating revenue. You know, so really being flexible, having a vision in mind, but you know, being like you said, you got to be willing to say, hey, you know what, I was wrong, and we're going to go in a totally different direction. You have to be willing to do that. If you're not confident enough in yourself to do that, then you know you're going to struggle, I think.
Yeah, agree. So you mentioned before, Bill, radical honesty, and you mentioned that you have a formula, if you like, around how you onboard your team. And tell us more about that. I'm curious.
Yeah, so my whole leadership philosophy can live with one quote. I live by one quote, and that is that you pay employees to do their job, but they volunteer their best, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to get the best out of a team, you might get them, you know, through coercion and pressure and, you know, this strong leadership. You might get them, everyone, to do the maximum amount of work that they need to do, but they're not going to volunteer their best. They're not going to be at their best. So, you know, I love this servant leadership principle, where you work in, you know, that shift from being a boss to being a servant leader and having this empathy, active listening, and building trust with your team. And it's not about being, you know, when I talk to people about servant leadership, I think, oh, it's all about being nice and soft. And it's not. It's about having empathy, understanding them, giving them all the tools they need to succeed. But then I weave in a couple of other things into this servant leadership methodology. The first thing is radical honesty. So radical honesty is the old Netflix policy. You might have heard radical candor. Netflix, half of their policies are probably illegal by Australian employment laws, but radical honesty is a great one. And basically what it is that, and I do this when I onboard everyone, and the next one I'll talk about in a second, but we talk about this theory that in our business, we want to be constantly improving. And the only way to constantly improve is to give feedback. So radical honesty says that anytime you see something that could be done better in the business, and it doesn't matter if you're junior and you're talking to the CEO that could do something better, it's your job, and you're obliged to go to that person one-on-one, talk to them about it in a respectful way, not around other people, and not to your manager. Let's say you're a junior person, not to your manager or their manager, directly to the CEO if that's the person. That's the policy. And you got to talk about a respectful way, one-on-one, and try and come up with solutions. But it is in the interest of the business that you do that. And the best way I found to implement this radical honesty policy is, first of all, it needs to be something you do at every onboard, that you onboard new people and talk about it at the start. And then you got to train people on how to give the feedback, because people can go rogue and be really aggressive with it, how to give the feedback. But then also it needs to be constantly reiterated. And I found the best way to get people to start doing it is to encourage them to give me some feedback. So try and find a way to give me some feedback. Then I'll react in a really positive way. And then that gives me the license to give them feedback. So, you know, this servant part is, you're giving them all the soft and fluffy things. You're giving them all the tools. You get support, emotional support. You know, my first question in every one-on-one is, how are you feeling? It's not, what are your numbers? What is this? It's, how are you feeling? Because that gets out the good and the bad. I'm feeling great. We're doing great. I hit my numbers. Or I'm feeling bad because this reason. Yeah. So that's a radical honesty. And then the second part of it is what I call ultimate responsibility. And the ultimate responsibility basically means that every single task, low down as task, to project, to team, to the whole business, one person is ultimately responsible. The CEO is responsible for the entire business. He's ultimately responsible for that. But every task, one person is responsible. So, you know, when you go to someone, you say, hey guys, we need this task done. Can you all work together to get it done? That's fine, but there must be one person that leads that. So you may say, Rita, we need this task done. Go and find the people that you need to help complete that task. But Rita is responsible in this scenario. And then, you know, the department leader is responsible for Rita, and then so forth, right? So having that ultimate responsibility, with layering on radical honesty and then that servant leadership, I think those three layers, from what I've seen with the employees of today, seem to get the best results.
Yeah, I really like it. And I think so Radical Candor is a great book, and I suspect that some of the radical honesty principles have probably come from the, similar kind of theories. It is based on servant leadership, but also uh that strong cultures where people want to come to work. And I love your quote, and I'm going to pop it on social media, attribute it to you, around, you pay employees to do their job, but they volunteer to do their best. It's gold.
Yeah.
Because getting them to do their best and creating an environment and a culture where they are willing to give you their best is about, trust at the end of the day. And if you want radical honesty, it's got to be based on that trust, as you discussed. Ultimate responsibility, I think, is awesome too, because accountability is a big thing in most organizations. It's certainly, Patrick Lencioni says that without it, it's one of the 5 dysfunctions of a team if you don't have that clear accountability. But I love what you're saying there around, you might say, well, team, this is what we're here to achieve, but ultimately one of you is going to take responsibility for a component of this, and kind of the buck stops with you. It feels to me like it would put a hell of a lot of skin in the game, but also drive up commitment, drive up accountability.
Yeah. And it's not just about blaming someone if something goes wrong. It's about having ownership and saying, okay, actually, this is my job to get this done by this day, and making sure it gets done. Ownership's a really important part of it. But, accountability is one. Yeah, if you build the right team, if you do all the right things, then really your job as a leader is to keep people accountable and give them all the support they need. And with our executive leadership coaching that we do, we do a weekly 15-minute session, accountability session. And the first 10 minutes of that are, this is what you told us you were going to do last week. Did you do it? Why not? Or did you, whatever, how did it go? And then what are you going to do this week? And then the last 4 or 5 minutes, we just say, is there anything we can help you with? But really the session is really about the accountability piece. What you tell us you're going to do last week. And accountability is so important to me because, I'm an entrepreneur, but I don't mind being managed. So that's why I've worked in corporate. Like I don't have this, I don't want to be managed. I don't want to work for someone. I've never had that thought process. So much so that when my business partner left one of my businesses a few years back, I engaged a business coach, because I knew if I weren't accountable to someone, and a business coach, you're not really accountable to them in the fact that you employ them, right? You pay them. So, but I knew my personality. If I told someone I was going to do something, I was going to do it, whereas if I didn't, maybe I'd get lazy. And people think that you're this super person and you're always motivated. It's not the case. I just won't let people down, So accountability is really important for me personally, and I think it's important for everyone. You got to have accountability. Accountability is not like a scary thing. It's a motivator, Oh,
I couldn't agree with you more, Bill. There's one weird thing that's quite weird in particular that I've done around accountability. So, and I tell this story to people a lot, but a couple of years ago, my family bought me a guitar for Mother's Day. So I had asked for a guitar, and up until that point, I'd never picked up a guitar and played in my life. Now, I was working with a group at the time around this kind of period around May, when it was Mother's Day here in Australia. And I said to the group, we were declaring accountability goals. So it was a leadership team. They were declaring their accountability goals to each other for exactly the reasons you raised there, that if we're accountable to others, we're more likely to keep our promise. And so the accountability goal that I declared for myself was that I promised the group that at the end of our time working together, and it was a 6-week program, that I would play them a song on the guitar. I went to YouTube and I searched, what's the easiest song to learn on YouTube? YouTube told me that it was A Horse with No Name, which is the only song that I know how to play on guitar. It's only got the 2 chords. But the beauty of me declaring that song, and I can still pick up the guitar, and I won't do it now, but I still can pick the song. And I haven't really picked up the guitar since to learn anything. And the only reason I did it is because I declared it to that group. And like you, there was no way that I was going to let that group down, because I would be hypocritical. I couldn't be asking them to be accountable for their goals if I didn't have some skin in the game and I wasn't accountable there. So I think I always find it's easier to disappoint myself, because often it's not a declared goal or a declared commitment or a KPI or something I want to achieve. But if I declare it to people, then by hook or by crook, I'm going to do it, because I don't want to let that group down. So what you say there completely resonates. It's why I think accountability is so important in a team.
Yeah, and I think I think that's why you should declare what you want to do. Even as an entrepreneur, talk to your friends, talk to your family. Hey, this is what I want to achieve. Because when you say it out loud and other people then hear it and they say, oh, great, good luck, or you're not going to do it, or whatever it is, suddenly you've put that out there that you're going to do that. You put a bit of pressure on yourself. And I think the right amount of pressure is so important. One of the, well, every type of team is different, but when I was the chief revenue officer at PropTech Group, I always tell our head of sales, running a sales team, there's lots of things you need to do. You need to know them emotionally, you need to help them with their business, all that kind of thing. But one of the most important things about a sales team is managing the pressure valve. And I used to talk about it like, sometimes you need to hit a target. So you got to push that pressure valve up and the steam's pumping out and everyone's running ragged, but you got to do it because you got to hit a number for a quarter or whatever it is. But then when they hit that quarter or they don't hit the quarter, whatever it is, you have to let that pressure valve out. Otherwise they're going to burn out. It's going to blow. And I remember it was late. So when did I leave it? So late 2021. We had pushed the team so hard. We grew from 9 million to 20 million in revenue in 1 year, profitably in a SaaS business, software as a service business, which is really hard to do. And the team was they were amazing achievers and they worked really hard and we really pushed them. And I remember we got to the end of that year and you could see they were burnt out. We were nowhere near our number. And I said to Mark at the time, I said, can you just give me 5 minutes in the sales meeting? I attend some of them. And I basically took all responsibility. And I said to the team, guys, you have done amazingly all year. This number was too high this quarter. I made a mistake. I promised it to the board and to the CEO. I take full responsibility for this. I completely understand if you don't make it. I'd love it to save my backside if we did hit it. But if we don't, none of you are going to be to blame. And I collective sort of shoulders dropped, and guess what? We hit the number, we hit the number. And, honestly, I didn't think we would. I didn't do it for that reason. I just thought if I don't take the pressure off, people are going to resign or people are going to burn out. And just by taking that pressure off, that was a lesson for me that it actually gave them more energy and they went and hit that number.
Yeah. Do you reckon a lot of that was about their commitment to you around like, all right, Bill, you might have promised it, but we also kind of committed to you that we would be able to do that? Like how much of that?
I think so. I speak to a lot of my ex-employees and, I've got really strong relationships with all of them because especially if I hire someone into a team, I will back them as long as they're doing their best. I will back them to the hill. And I think people feel that within me. I'm the first one to pass on praise. Like I'll never take praise on. I'll always build people up, whether it's, I do a lot of, I do this purposely. It's no secret on social media. If someone does something really great, I'll build them up a lot because first of all, I want them to get the accolades because they've done great. But second of all, I think, really, they're the ones doing the work. And I think if you give them the trust that they're the ones that are going to be the ones that get rewarded for it, then, you're building that relationship. And I think honestly, they probably, part of it, I don't think it was the only thing, but part of it was they wanted to get their commissions and all that kind of thing. But part of it, I think was, hey, Bill's been there for us maybe, and maybe we don't want to let him down. I think there may have been some of that in there too.
Yeah, and it's a lovely way that I guess you can keep the team accountable. But and I love your analogy there about the pressure valve, because by being able to just tweak it and really be responsive to what the team need from you at the time is a key lever. Because if you're always kind of in one mode, I often talk to teams about if you're in the one gear all the time, you're not going to go as far as you want to. But you've got to be able to listen to your engine and move into those gears, depending on what, where you're at, what your speed is, how the team's going, and listening to your team like an engine. You got
to know your industry, know when the seasons, when the good seasons and the bad seasons are, know when it's going to be quiet, even if you don't have a choice, it's going to be quiet. So, try and give them the pressure valve release then, and just understanding your team and understanding the environment that you're working within is really important, because you can't go full pelt all year. It just doesn't work like that, especially when you're talking about a sales team, because really high pressure, really hard job doing sales. It's there's a lot of high pressure everywhere in business, in finance teams and all that. But especially in those where you're getting a lot of rejection and things like that, you have to find periods where you can take the pressure off a little bit. Yeah, definitely. And Bill, across those different roles that you've had, and you've obviously had a mixture of corporate roles where you've, been a member of the leadership team in that C-suite, and ones where you've run it, in your own right. But looking back now, if there was one bit of advice that you wish you had received throughout that time, what would it have been? Yeah, so early in my career, I had this really weird relationship with business because I'm a failed athlete. I thought I was going to be a professional soccer player, delusional, but I thought that I was. I really dead set thought that I was until I was about 19. And I had this this idea about business where it was cutthroat and there was bad actors, people that were just, narcissistic and just wanted to win no matter what. And I said, you know what, I'm going to be just the opposite to that. I'm going to be lovely to everyone and want everyone to love me. And what I did was incorrectly is being nice is not a wrong thing, but being nice and doing the right thing are not the same. Sometimes the right thing is to have a difficult conversation. In fact, I would say most of the time, the right thing is to have the difficult conversation. And when I was younger, I don't know if I was scared of it or I thought I was doing the right thing by not having the difficult conversation. It's probably a mixture of those two. It's probably was a little bit scared to have those conversations, but also maybe I thought if I was just nice to everyone, they'll do better. But if you want people to improve, you have to help them by giving them feedback. And sometimes the feedback's not going to be positive. It's just how it works. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake I made, especially as a young manager, and I'm getting better at it, is, giving feedback or differentiating nice to right. What's right is not always what's being a nice person.
So I guess it's being able to have those difficult conversations, but knowing that if there's good trust in the relationship, that it will be taken in the right way, and that feedback is actually intended to help that person as opposed to kind of drop them to their knees.
It goes without saying that you do it respectfully and you do it, and in a way that's not going to, you don't want to hurt someone's feelings anyway because they're not going to perform, right? So even if you were narcissistic, you don't want to do that. But certainly, doing it the right way is important. But you gotta have those difficult conversations if you want to be better. I hate people that have this fixed mindset. I know this is how we've done it. I've done this way. It's worked for me. I'm constantly learning. Like, I've got this big thing that I love following the 20-year-old marketing gurus, because they're doing things that we've never thought of. I'm 42 now. And I remember when I was in my early 20s and we were doing marketing, I was thinking, geez, these dinosaurs don't know what they're doing, because you just learn differently and you got different. So, just being open to learning, I think is really important. Having that growth mindset.
Yeah. And you did mention the generations at the start of this conversation and the different things that they are expecting of us as leaders. And I think there's, what I'm hearing in that is that there is a lot that we can learn. So yes, it plays in beautifully around this growth mindset, but there's also a lot that we can learn, and we can then bring people on board with us, as opposed to I'm the leader, I've got something to teach you, you will learn from me because I'm the leader. It becomes a lot more consultative and collaborative as a team.
Yeah, I think when you're leading people, language is important as well. If you're using a lot of the word I, not gonna lead very well. It's very much a we mindset. How do we get you to get better? Not how do I get you to get better results? Or it's how do we improve your results together? I believe in you. How do we improve them together? I think that's really important. Even I remember we performance managed someone once, and in my mind, I was thinking, there's not a chance he's going to improve enough to stay on. But instead of most people performance manage people to get them out, it's a process to get them out. I've always thought to myself, it's more than likely it's not going to work, but I'm going to give them every opportunity. So I'm going to do everything in my power for them to succeed. And that means I'm going to give them the extra time, the daily catch-ups, all those types of things. And once in a while, somebody will really surprise you. And I did that to someone. He's still at that business today. He became one of our best salespeople from literally being almost out the door, just because I think he felt that support. Maybe he just needed a little bit of a push to do it. And then he became one of our best salespeople. So, having genuine intentions is important.
Yeah, and that belief in people too, which comes back to that conviction that we spoke about.
Yeah.
Bill, I wanted to finish off with a question for you. So obviously you're working with lots of leaders, and you're still actively involved in a couple of businesses, and no doubt you're liaising with leaders across all different levels. To be a contemporary leader today, what do you think are the core capabilities and the ones that you see are most important for leadership today?
So I think one of the big ones for me now is recruiting the right people, having an understanding of what a good employee looks like for your business. And to do that, you have to have a deep understanding of, what you stand for as a business, what your values are, what you're trying to achieve. And understanding, if you want to be at a certain level, who do I need? You know, if you are a business doing $1 million in revenue, you don't want to get a Coca-Cola executive, right? So who are the right people at the right stage of their business to recruit? And I always say, when you're recruiting people, it's skill set and time of life, you know. So sometimes they've got all the right skills, all the right ability, but they're just past it, you know, in terms of motivation wise. So that's the first one, recruiting right. And then if you recruit right, setting the expectations and keeping people accountable, I think are really important. And then, you know, we talked about this with servant leadership. I guess the fourth thing in this little in this quadrant is that really just having a genuine desire to help, you know, and to do the right thing by your people. And that's, you know, I've got a lot of leaders that I've you know, look up to, and I love parts of what they do. But the leader I sort of the big corporate leader that I gel with the most in terms of personality and the way they lead is Richard Branson. I always, you know, even when I was young, I just really was drawn to the way he leads his teams, you know, super compassionate, but also very, very successful. And you can be both, right? You don't have to be this cutthroat person to be successful.
Yeah, I love that. And I think his leadership style certainly resonates with many, but you do see that that genuine warmth and care. And whenever you see anything under any business that he owns, that banner, there's this sense of community and connection. So it's almost like, yeah, I'd love to be part of that, because you feel like you're kind of welcomed in, looked after, but there's also a high performance that's expected, you know, which is kind of the ticket to playing those teams.
I got a funny story, actually.
Yeah.
In my early 20s, I read Screw It, Let's Do It. It's a really short book. I've read it about 10 times since. It's such a great little book to get your juices going.
Yeah.
And
what's the book called again, Bill?
Screw It, Let's Do It.
Yeah.
It's probably like a 3 or 4 hour read. You know, it's
good.
But it's great. It just talks about his story and his philosophy. And I was so enamored by him. It was in my early 20s. I don't know how old I was. I wrote him an email. And I found like an email address, and obviously it goes to like a PR company. And I just explained like in really long detail about why I loved his philosophy and how I wanted to be like him. And would you believe I got an interview with to be the head of distribution for his because I was in mortgages at the time, for his lending arm, from that email. And I actually went through the stages to the last. I didn't get the job in the end. And but one other person got it because I didn't have a financial planning degree, and it was a financial planning and lending. But I got to literally to this last stage of this really senior role when I was in my early 20s, because I wrote an email to Richard Branson.
Because you adopted the Screw It, Let's Do It. Like, you're like, I'm just going to do this. That is awesome. It's there's a book that's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. So it's that whole mindset around bite the bullet, you know, the just do it. So I love that. It's a great story. And you know, I bet you never thought that would happen, that you'd be offered a job in one of his group of companies.
No, I just loved it so much, and I just felt it just felt from the book, reading the book, I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do. I wanted to do it, and I just did it. And you know, I don't know if it's because of that, but I think that's an important mentality. I think you just got to you got to do. You know, ideas are just that until you start executing, right? So you got to do, and you got to test, and you know, be smart about it. Obviously, if it doesn't work, you know, some things you got to leave behind, or you got to adapt, but yeah, as any kind of business leader, business person, you just got to do a lot. You know, ideating is important, but it should be a very small part of your day and your week, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And I think so, too many of us get stuck in, it's got to be perfect before I can execute. And perfection is the enemy, right, of doing it and just getting it out. Because at least when you're getting it out, you're letting it breathe, and you're letting it be seen by others and tested by others and talked about by others. But if you're kind of keeping it to yourself, you know, in a very cocooned fashion until you think it's ready, you might have your own blinkers on, really, about the success of it.
Yeah, I have a fantastic EA, Bianca Yao, and we have this concept that I always say to her. I say 90% it. So she sends it to me. I look at it. I go, yep, that's about right. 90% of it. So not all things. Some things you've got to be exact, you know, your finances and all that kind of thing. But 95% of what you do, you can 90% it. You know, like if you're at 90% of that being right, that's fine. You know, because, you know, 90% for a task, like think about writing a blog, right? 90% you might take you an hour and a half. 100% might take you 3 hours. But it's not worth it. It's not that 10% is not worth double the time, right? So just you know, those kind of tasks where I say just 90% it, and just 90% it, and that will do it.
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, Bill, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I can't believe that time has evaporated so quickly. There are so many golden nuggets from this conversation, which I will absolutely share on social media too. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you today, and I appreciate your generosity of time, but also your willingness to share your experience and some of your practices and your leadership principles, which I think our audience are going to love. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I hope they get value from it. It's been super fun talking to you.
They certainly will. Thanks again, Bill. See you next time on the Leadership Lane podcast.
Thank you.